Now, welcome back. We did indicate that it's going to be quite a jam-packed half hour. So let's start with some international news first. And in Nigeria, of course, Bola Tinubu of the ruling party APC in Nigeria has been declared the winner of the presidential elections that were held last Saturday. Now, this comes amid concern that the Electoral Commission in the country has failed to conduct elections in a proper manner. So to help us unpack all of this, we're joined by SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, thanks so much for joining us. So, of course, this is a big story for the African continent. It's a big election. But we now have heard that Bola Tinubu has been declared president-elect and the winner of this particular election. But who exactly is Bola Tinubu?
Well, he's a member of the ruling party. He's the person who was responsible for Lagos. As a person who has been in the party for quite a long time, very close to the outgoing president, President Muhammadu Buhari, and therefore he is not new in the politics of Nigeria.
So in a way, what would be expected then is a continuation of what has been in terms of the government of Nigeria.
Much as he has promised to deal with the current challenges in that country, that includes the issue of the economy, the issue of security, the youth, particularly in relation to unemployment, and perhaps to position Nigeria as a powerhouse on the continent, because we know it is the largest country in terms of population, but also in terms of being #1 economy on the continent. And therefore, it is almost like continuity, but doing things differently, because during the last years of Muhammadu Buhari, there were lots and lots of concerns. You know that the youth took to the streets for the past 2 years, complaining about the situation there, and the security cluster didn't conduct themselves well. There were investigations, and also there are challenges in certain parts of Nigeria. You know that the Boko Haram and other insurgents are really causing trouble for Nigeria, and particularly for the Sahel region, that include those countries that are part of the Sahel region. The border between Nigeria and Niger, you also have a serious problem of security, and these security challenges did play themselves out during this election, because in some areas they couldn't even go to cast their ballot.
Which is, of course, led to some criticism. There have been allegations of fraud and corruption cited by some of the observer missions, the European Union observer mission, also the former President Obasanjo, also, coming out and stating this. We saw on social media some of these reports of people who were being prevented from going to cast their ballots. So how is all of that going to be dealt with?
Well, you are correct, Sakina. The former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, who is quite influential, who was a former member of APC, the party itself, and decided to leave the party of Atiku Abubakar and join the support in terms of supporting Muhammadu Buhari when he was contesting elections. He has now turned against the very same party, saying that they didn't run the country well, and he was supporting the Labour Party candidate Peter Obi, and unfortunately he didn't win, and therefore he issued a statement yesterday morning. Actually, when we woke up, we saw that statement where he was quite scathing in terms of how the Electoral Commission conducted elections, and saying that the elections were not free and fair, and even warning that this may lead to more instability, as we saw the past 2 years, where young people took to the streets complaining about the establishment. And he said this is going to continue.
So Obi, as you say, very popular with the youth as well. So this is going to be an election result that the young people of Nigeria, one would imagine, won't be happy about. But just looking at it overall, we've seen previously in elections on the continent, regardless of what the observer missions may note, regardless of the criticism of the elections and how they are run, and also regardless of the claims that are made by opposition parties and others, the election results usually stand. So what is the importance of these observer missions?
Well, they are quite important, but clearly, as it is indicated in terms of what they are supposed to do, is to observe elections and make pronouncement and advise whoever is responsible for the organizations that they represent. For example, you have the European Union, who have been very scathing, similarly to what Obasanjo did, saying that this election was just a sham. And you can see from the observer missions of the ECOWAS, that is the region, and the African Union. I saw the statement that was signed by the leader of the ECOWAS observer mission and the AU that was led by the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, that they didn't even want to talk about the election process. They just calling for calm and calling on Nigerians not to resort to violence. That's a clear indication that there's something wrong. They don't have to say it loud. And we are now expecting the Commonwealth, that is led by our former President Thabo Mbeki, to issue a statement, and we will see what he is going to say. But I think even the Commonwealth statement, it's not going to be very kind or very clear in terms of pronouncing the fairness and the credibility of elections.
So then in terms of accepting the results against that backdrop, it raises so many questions. And at what point are we going to pause and say, okay, we need to literally step back and start discussing the importance of elections actually being run in a free and fair manner? Because if these observer missions are observing all of these irregularities and atrocities that are taking place, how can that election be declared free and fair?
The Electoral Commission in a country is the one that is supposed to declare the elections. Others are observing. They can't declare. They can make pronouncement in terms of their observations. And that is why I'm saying when you look at the European Union, they are quite clear in terms of their observation. And then you look at the statement, ECOWAS and AU jointly, you can see there's a problem. Maybe it's because they are a regional body, which Nigeria is a superpower in, that is ECOWAS, and the AU, Nigeria, the largest economy on the continent. But you can see that there's something wrong.
But doesn't that then become an exercise in futility?
Yes, it might be, it might not be. Sometimes when you look at the observer mission, you know, there's time when you are covering those elections. You can see that many lives are going to be lost. And there's time where you can see the intervention of the observer mission did save life. I'll make an example on the Kenyan election. I was there, the past two elections. After that violent election in 2008, the election that followed, the observer mission assisted Kenya not to descend to violence again, much as there were concerns from the opposition. Even this election, we know that there was a concern. You know that even people who are monitoring were kind of sending warnings that Kenya is likely to descend into violence again. But the talks behind the scenes, we see them monitoring and looking at counting and all of that. That's not the only thing that they do. They engage, they speak to the candidates, they ask candidates to be able to speak to their supporters. And it is during that time, for me, as someone who has covered elections in many countries on the continent, I think they do play a role in ensuring that you don't see people dying. They will still die. Many people have died now in Nigeria, but the number could have been even bigger if you don't have people who are watching. But at the end of the day, the Electoral Commission, we have to put the electoral body of Nigeria or any country on a spotlight that the electoral bodies must do their work. Unfortunately, all the time you have these glaring mistakes and a way of not conducting themselves in a proper way. And if you don't have a credible electoral commission, and it doesn't start on voting day, it starts from registration, campaigning, and all of that. If the electoral commission doesn't do the work properly, you will not have a free and fair elections. You will not. And therefore, I think we need to look at the conduct of electoral institutions on the continent in terms of how they conduct themselves, because they are the ones who, at the end of the day, make these pronouncements.
And I think that's what we really need to look at. Maybe, you know, a discussion that needs to be had because, as you say, you have these glaring atrocities and yet we're going to have an election declared against that backdrop. So it just raises so many questions. But thank you so much, Sophie Mokoena, who is, of course, SAB News' international editor, and speaking to us about the latest developments in Nigeria. So I'm hoping Sophie will take that up, looking at the electoral commissions, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent, and exactly their job and the importance, the role that they play in terms of free and fair elections.